serious all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Um, we have the Omicron variant out there, and we are bringing back Dr. Alain Simard. There's plenty of lies and misinformation in coronavirus. So Truth Lies Shenanigans brings you the truth. Stories directly from the people that lived it, frontline workers and survivors. This is the COVID Chronicles.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Dr. Alain, how are you?
Hello.
Hi,
Hello,
everyone.
Alan. Yeah.
Nice to see
Bonjour.
you again.
All right, many of our viewers may remember Dr. Alain Simard. He's an professor of immunology and head of the laboratory of neuroimmunology at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine in Sudbury, Canada. He was on with us last season, episode 22. So check that out. Thanks again for stopping by, Dr. Alain, to share your expertise with us once again. Thank you
My
so much.
pleasure.
All
Thank
right.
you.
All right, so we asked you back because the newest COVID variant, Omicron, has become a huge concern worldwide, and our hosts and a ton of our listeners were asking questions. Now, a week and a half ago, families like mine were in the US getting ready for Thanksgiving, eating some turkey, talking family, mostly maskless, right? Thinking we were finally turning the corner on COVID. As long as we're all vaccinated, we should be okay. And then we hear about this new variant. It's suddenly resistant to vaccines, calling it Omicron, and everyone's panicking again, like we may be heading back to lockdowns. So here's my first question. There's been no deaths yet reported for Omicron. That's still only like a couple of weeks out. And the symptoms in general seem to be milder from what we're hearing, but a large number of the infected were fully vaccinated. And it's also spreading 2 times faster than the Delta variant, which was already like 2 times faster than the original. So, is this just a faster spreading virus that's much weaker? And is this type of variant actually helpful to help us reach herd immunity without a significant death rate? As COVID had a huge death rate, obviously.
Yeah, those are great questions. I think first off, I have to say that it's pretty early for this new variant, and it's scientifically there's a lot of information that we just don't really have a true answer for, or at least enough data to be able to make sound or strong conclusions. What we know so far for sure, or at least it seems to be the case, is precisely like you said. The virus does seem to spread a lot faster. So it's likely that it's more transmissible, but there's also a few other factors that can play into this, and one of them is immune evasion as well. Right. So depending on how well our bodies are able to defend against this virus, especially if you've been vaccinated or if you've had COVID, you've been infected before. If the virus can evade your immune system, then you can be reinfected again, and it makes it a lot easier for it to spread afterwards. So you have quite a few factors that are involved. It does, the data again. It's likely that it does spread faster, but there are many other factors that could be in play here, and we have to be careful before we conclude for sure. What we don't know is exactly how fast or how much faster it does transmit from one person to the other. That we don't know yet. In terms of immune evasion, so far, again, with the caveat that we're talking about a short period of time in or at least at first, where we had the bigger outbreak of this variant. It's still, in a way, on the world stage, it's still an isolated, isolated case, I guess you could say, where there could be other factors that might explain why it would have spread incredibly fast, right? And to be honest, we don't really have a good understanding of that. We have to wait a bit longer to see, elsewhere, because we know that this variant is elsewhere in the world. It's pretty much everywhere. How fast is it going to spread there, right? In different situations. For example, some parts of the world have less vaccination rates. Others have higher vaccination rates, right? So we have to be able to compare both before we can conclude whether or how effective our vaccines are against this variant, for example. We'll need to have, one good example would be with the Delta.
Mhm.
I remember, and I'll always this struck me when the Delta came around in Ontario. We had a situation where we still had a certain number, good number of cases from the original. Then all of a sudden, Delta appeared, and then we could calculate the famous R value for both independently. And then at the time, with the public health measures that we had at that time, you could see that the R value was under 1 for the original, but it was around 1.3 for the Delta. And that's when you have, like, same situation, same area, and you could calculate both R values. And that's when you can know, okay, Delta is this much more contagious than the previous
How
one.
long did it take before you could figure that out?
It didn't take that long, right? You have to wait, unfortunately, for a certain number of cases because to creep up, I guess, in that area. Because if you only have 10 of them, you can't really calculate anything from 10 cases. You need to get them much higher than that. But then if you have a situation like if we take in South Africa, for example, right, they barely had any cases anymore in that area with the Delta variant. But all of a sudden you get the Omicron, and it took up it really quickly. So in that area, it can be hard to calculate the difference between the two, right? So
Wow.
that's why we do need a bit more data. That's I'm always afraid of jumping to conclusions, but I will say that so far it does seem like this variant is going to spread a lot more quickly than the Delta.
Wow.
Is it more or less severe? There's contradictory information on that right now. You hear a lot of anecdotal, some data with limited data, where it does suggest that it's less severe. However, we have to also acknowledge that in a lot of the cases that we've had so far, we're in young adults where COVID is less severe, anyways.
Yeah.
A lot of cases were in vaccinated or people, right? So yes, it does seem to be able to infect vaccinated people. That can't hide from that one. But don't forget that the vaccines, even though they don't work 100% against preventing infection, they are so far have been very effective at
Reducing the
preventing against
symptoms.
severe symptoms, right? So is that one of the reasons why it appears to be less? But
Milder symptoms, right?
yeah. So again, you have to
I was thinking
study
Oh,
the unvaccinated people, right? And or those that are at risk. That's when you're going to start trying to see, is it more or less severe.
Okay. Before I get to
So
my
I'm not going to pronounce myself on that one at this point because we don't have enough data.
fair enough. Before I get to my other hosts, there was a question online we had earlier from Robin Johnson, and she asked, with so many variations, we've got more than 50 mutations. Um, why isn't it considered a full mutated virus? Why is it a variant versus its own virus,
Mm.
like, say, for example, COVID-21? Because usually there's some threshold I know where you have a certain number of mutations and it becomes its own virus.
oh yeah.
Yep. To be honest, I'm not too sure exactly what that threshold is, right? So 50 mutations does sound like a lot, okay? But let's take a step back here. From what I remember or from what I know, this virus has about 30,000 what we call nucleotides in its genomic sequence, okay?
Mhm.
So you get 50 mutations out of 30,000. That's not a whole lot. If we compare SARS-CoV-2 versus the original, the first SARS virus, so SARS-CoV,
Mhm.
they only have about 85% similarity, right? So about 15% of their genomic sequence is different, right?
Mm.
So those are much bigger differences, right? So 50 mutations sounds like a lot, but in reality, this you don't have whole genes that are disappearing. You don't have new genes appearing, right? They're all the same, very similar to the original one. It's just that you have these smaller mutations here and there that obviously can have a big impact on how the virus functions, but it's essentially the same one, just wearing a different hat, for example, right? And if we want to look at it that way.
It totally makes sense. All right, Lizzie, you have any questions?
So I do have a question. So how do you think in terms of the response? Like what's been the differences in the response? to COVID and then the Delta and now Omicron. Like, a part of me thinks that this is, and not to say that we shouldn't be making people aware of what's going on with Omicron, but I feel like a lot of people out there are like, okay, see, so now we have another variation of another iteration of COVID. So then what's the point in getting vaccinated? Do you feel there are a lot of people are out there with that type of skepticism?
Oh, definitely. A lot of reasons to explain that. I mean, everybody's tired of COVID, right? We've been talking about it for 2 years,
Yeah,
Understatement.
for 2 years,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, and at one point you get desensitized, right? So,
Mm,
one of the
mm.
things, probably one of the problems here, is that we've been campaigning for vaccinations. You need to protect yourselves and protect others around you by getting vaccinated. Then all of a sudden you get these new variants where the
Mhm.
vaccines work slightly less, and then people start wondering, well, why? What's the point? You know, it can you blame people from getting discouraged? That no, you can't. But at the same time, we have to, keep sight of what the goal is here, which is to do what's best to try and protect others, protect the people that we love, and then especially also protect the people that are vulnerable. Right?
Mhm.
You might, as a young adult, has a healthy immune system, for example, no predisposing conditions. Yeah, if you get COVID, chances are, you'll be sick, but you'll be fine. So taking the vaccine at that point, you might tell yourself, well, it's not really for protecting myself, but you have to remember, well, you might pass it on to multiple other people. And then who knows who's going to get really sick and could potentially die from the vaccine.
Yep. Right,
So we
yeah.
can't forget that,
Right,
right?
Gianni?
And one of the things, Ellen, very quickly that I try to remind people is that death isn't the only symptom of COVID. Like, there are a lot of people who survive, but who have had
Long COVID.
horrible
Mhm.
outcomes. And again, we had, a guest on last year, COVID. He had three of his fingers amputated. While he was on the ventilator, he had like several strokes. Like, it's not just death.
Yep.
You could
Yeah,
live,
mild, are you
but
saying
still,
you're
yeah,
saying
but
mild
live
symptoms aren't necessarily mild.
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And people need to keep that in mind.
They do, and what we're only starting to understand now is what's called long COVID, right?
Yep.
Some of
Yes,
the examples that you
yes,
just gave, yeah, they're
yeah.
pretty extreme and drastic side effects of the symptoms themselves. But some people basically never recover. They'll have psychological
Yeah.
effects, for the rest.
Mm.
Well, who knows for how long? And, we can only say for sure for up to 2 years so far, because that's how long we've been in this pandemic, right? But as far as we can tell, they could last for decades. We don't know, and this can affect kids. It can affect anyone, right? And you don't need to have severe symptoms to get this long COVID. You could have very mild symptoms and still have, you know, very significant impacts that, could change your life forever. So can't forget that either.
All right, we're
Oh,
running
I
short on
agree.
time, so let me get Gianni and Rob in here. Gianni, go ahead.
You kind of answered my question in regard to does the vaccine, does that same treatment uh, work on the Omicron variant? But I also wanted to know, does the same like precautions stand with people wearing masks and social distancing? Does that still stand for this, or do you think this is more of an aggressive
Yeah, so likelihood,
virus?
right, is that it's more aggressive. Um, so that being said, I think that it's even more important now to take the precautions. One of the things that I find has been a tremendous fault in the public health messaging and in the media as well, is that we've known for a long time now. There's been a lot of evidence that it's not only about the social distancing. This virus can also transmit in aerosols, right? And which can stay in the air for a lot longer and can go a lot further than 6 feet. Um,
Mm,
Now, whether the risk
mm,
is higher or lower, I mean, that's a whole debate, and that to me is irrelevant. The point is that it can transmit. If you're in the same room as someone for a very long period of time, that's infectious. You can be more than 6 feet away, and there's a fairly good likelihood that you're going to be exposed to the virus as
That,
well through these aerosols, right?
that reminds me.
Um,
I was in a I was playing volleyball the other day, and someone we have a mask mandate, and so we all have to wear masks. But for some reason, one of the guys pulls his mask down, turns around, coughs, and puts his mask back on. And
Please stop.
I was
Please
like,
stop.
are
Please
you
stop.
kidding me? I was
Please
livid.
stop.
I was yelling at him across the. I was like, Jim. I was like, what are you doing? It's like nonsense because
Bruh.
yeah,
those aerosols
Wow.
travel. That can
yeah,
travel.
they do. They travel, and there's plenty of videos to show how far they can travel. And
Bruh.
there's scientific evidence, like they've detected this virus about 20 feet away, right? And hours later, they've detected
Wow.
it in other rooms of a hospital when that were all isolated but shared ventilation. So
Yeah.
it can travel, right? So it's
Wow.
it's it's something that I do think that we need better messaging on, is to educate everyone on this fact and how to deal with it, right? So if you can be outside, for example, fresh air, open the windows.
Mm.
Those are all tricks that can get some fresh air and keep the virus levels low in the air. Wear better masks. That's another one, right? If you can't avoid it, make sure you wear something that's more like an N95, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
I've stopped wearing my cloth mask, and then for temporarily went to the surgical ones, but those have a poor fit, right?
Yeah, they
So
don't fit well.
They
Mhm.
do.
they don't fit
Oh my
well.
God, Alain, they do.
Yeah,
So
I'm
where,
constantly like, okay, there's a gap here, there's a
big
gap
gap,
there.
yeah,
Yes.
weird.
Yeah.
All right.
right. So it's super important to wear the proper PPE.
Okay.
And then here in
Write
Canada,
that
I mean,
down.
it's winter, right? We're all going to be stuck indoors for how many months now?
Yeah.
So
7.
cases are going to go up. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, actually, our cases in Maryland shot up from 1,500 to 4,500 right after Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
Yep, right
Are
after
you
Wow.
serious? All right, y'all,
4,500.
I'm
I mean,
about to go
from
under. I'm
3,000
about
more
to
than the
go
previous
back
week.
under. Oh my goodness.
So, Robbie, we have
Terrible.
like 2 minutes. Robbie, let's
Terrible.
ask
Sure.
your question. Mhm.
And for me, I mean, this is a virus doing what viruses do. It mutates, it propagates, it
Mhm.
wants to live, it wants to
Mhm.
inhabit as many hosts as possible. So, by virtue of putting off the mandates, the vaccinations, 2 years later, we find ourselves with a variant that is presumed, with limited data, to be to have a higher rate of transmissibility, requires less hospitalization, and it's transmissible twice as fast as the Delta, roughly. Um, Based on your studies in immunology and virology, the virus is doing what it is supposed to be doing, what it naturally does. Now, I know that Neo had referred back to, are we one step closer to herd immunity? I'm going to take it in the other direction. Are we one step closer now to a strain that can propagate faster? And because it can propagate faster, is there a possibility that it would turn into something more nefarious, deadlier to human?
Right. Those are great questions. I think there's a couple of questions in there.
Yeah,
Um,
we got like 60
in terms of
seconds.
in terms of herd immunity, I think that we're moving in the opposite direction, right? We likely will never
Absolutely.
reach herd immunity. Okay. In terms of virology, yes, you're right. You're absolutely correct that in terms of evolution of a virus, it's doing exactly what we would expect. And a virus wants to propagate and wants to survive. It's not going to do that if it kills us, however. If it starts killing too many people, right, then it's going to have a much harder time going from one person to the other. So over time, what tends to happen is that actually viruses will become more transmittable, but less deadly, right? Less severe symptoms. Doesn't mean that it always works out that way, right? It can, because mutations are random, right? And then, you could get one that's just going to, do the opposite.
Super spreader.
But over time, and I'm talking about over decades or sometimes even longer, it tends to go in the opposite direction. Like the common colds that we have are thought to have like a long time, thousands of years ago,
Kill people.
yeah, they would have killed a lot of people, but over time they became less deadly. Those are all, theoretical concepts. It's hard to prove because science, we've only been able to measure this for not too long compared to the evolution of man. But yeah, I think that's going to go in the opposite. So if everything holds out to be true, more transmittable, less severe disease, in my opinion, in a way, it can be a step in the right direction. It might mean that we'd be heading in that direction, but let's not forget that a lot of people are probably still going to die from this, especially if it's twice as transmittable. So it doesn't reduce the severity or the impact of this pandemic.
And we have a ton of questions online. We are really out of time, but we're going to carry you over into the after show, and we're going to ask all of those questions because we have questions like why don't people promote more natural ways to strengthen the body, like vitamin C? We have a question about the new pill, the treatment, the oral pill for the treatment. And so we have a bunch of questions that we're going to
Oh,
ask,
wow.
and we're going to take those to the after show. We're gonna go ahead and finish off
Awesome.
this show, and we'll take those into the after show. So, Dr. Alain, stick around, and we will see you then. We thank you so much for joining us for this segment here,
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you,
See you in a
Dr.
bit.
Alain.
and we will see you.
See you
We'll see
soon.
you shortly. Thank you. All right.
Very good. Very informative. Very good. Very good.
Yes.